diving in the kelp forest surrounded by swaying fronds. A haunting song echoed through the murky green. Turning slowly, faced with a wall of black and white, teeth like daggers, a mouth large enough to swallow whole, trapped between the kelp and the Leviathan's approach. No escape, no mercy, just the cold embrace of the deep. Hello everyone, welcome to the channel. Before we begin the ORCA ATTACK story, I want to ask for your support by subscribing to the channel. Your subscription is very important to us, so please subscribe, click the like button, and leave a comment telling us which city you're watching from. Now let's move on to the case. The morning mist clung to the surface of Johnstone Strait, softening the rugged coastline of British Columbia. Dr. Emma Harrison inhaled deeply, savoring the crisp salt air as she methodically prepared her equipment on the deck of the ORCA Song, her compact research vessel. The gentle lapping of waves against the hull and the distant cry of gulls provided a soothing backdrop to her preparations. Emma's fingers danced over the sophisticated hydrophone array, her mind already racing with the possibilities that lay ahead. For months, she had been tracking a particular pod of orcas, meticulously documenting their vocalizations and behaviors. Today, she hoped to make a breakthrough in decoding their complex communication patterns. "Everything set, Dr. Harrison?" called a voice from the shore. Emma looked up, shielding her eyes against the early morning sun. Her research assistant, Mark Chen, stood on the rocky beach, a drone controller in his hands. "Almost there, Mark," she called back. "Just calibrating the final sensors. How's our eye in the sky looking?" Mark gave a thumbs up. "Charged and ready to go. We'll have a bird's eye view of any activity within a 5-mile radius." Emma nodded, a surge of excitement coursing through her veins. This was what she lived for, the thrill of discovery, the chance to unlock the secrets of these magnificent creatures. She turned back to her equipment, double-checking each connection with practiced precision. As she worked, Emma's mind wandered to the data they had collected over the past week. The orcas had been unusually vocal, with patterns she had never encountered before. It was as if they were trying to communicate something urgent, something beyond their typical social calls or hunting coordination. "What are you trying to tell us?" Emma murmured to herself, her brow furrowed in concentration. With a final adjustment to the hydrophone, Emma straightened up, stretching her back. She glanced at her watch. 6:30 a.m. Perfect timing. The pod usually passed through this area around 7 a.m., following the morning salmon run. "All right, Mark," she called out. "I'm heading out. Keep that drone ready. If we're lucky, we might catch some breaching behavior today." Mark nodded, his expression a mix of excitement and concern. "Be careful out there, Emma. The forecast mentioned some potential choppy waters later this morning." Emma waved off his concern with a smile. "I've weathered worse, besides I'll be back before you know it, just a quick data collection run." As she untied the ORCA Song from the makeshift dock, Emma felt a familiar tingle of anticipation. Every encounter with the orcas was a privilege, a glimpse into a world so alien yet so intimately connected to our own. The small boat's engine hummed to life, and Emma skillfully guided it out into the strait. The mist was beginning to lift, revealing the breathtaking landscape of forested islands and snow-capped mountains in the distance. Emma breathed in deeply, feeling a profound sense of peace wash over her. As she navigated to her usual observation point, Emma's mind wandered to the peculiarities of the pod she had been studying. Led by a formidable matriarch she had nicknamed Luna, this group of orcas had shown behaviors that defied conventional understanding. Their hunting techniques were innovative, their social bonds complex, and their vocalizations. Well, that was what she hoped to unravel today. Emma cut the engine as she reached the designated coordinates, allowing the boat to drift gently. She powered up her equipment, the soft beep of initializing systems breaking the morning quiet. With practiced ease, she lowered the hydrophone array into the water, adjusting the sensitivity to filter out the ambient noise of the strait. For several minutes, there was nothing but the gentle lapping of waves against the hull. Emma's eyes scanned the horizon, searching for any sign of movement. Her hand hovered over her notebook, ready to jot down observations at a moment's notice. Then she saw it, a sleek black dorsal fin breaking the surface about half a mile out. Emma's heart leaped in her chest. "There you are," she whispered, a smile spreading across her face. As if in response, a series of clicks and whistles erupted from her speakers. Emma's fingers flew across her keyboard, recording timestamps and frequency patterns. The vocalizations were unlike anything she had heard before, more complex, more urgent. "What's got you so chatty today, Luna?" Emma mused aloud, her eyes darting between her computer screen and the water. Suddenly, the water around the boat began to churn. Emma's eyes widened as she realized the pod was much closer than she had initially thought. Multiple dorsal fins broke the surface, surrounding the orca song in a loose circle. For a moment, Emma was awestruck by the proximity of these magnificent creatures. She could see the intricate patterns of their black and white coloration, the spray from their blowholes creating miniature rainbows in the morning light. But as she watched, a feeling of unease began to creep over her. Something was off. The orca's movements seemed more deliberate. Their circling tightened and the vocalizations coming through her speakers took on a different tone, sharper, more aggressive. Emma's hand instinctively moved to her radio. "Mark," she called, trying to keep her voice steady. "Are you seeing this?" Static crackled for a moment before Mark's voice came through. "I see them, Emma. They're circling you. What's going on?" Before Emma could respond, the boat rocked violently. She stumbled, grabbing onto the railing to steady herself. An orca had brushed against the hull, much too close for comfort. "Mark," Emma said, her voice now tight with fear. "Something's wrong. They're not behaving normally. I'm going to try to—" Her words were cut short as another orca slammed into the boat, nearly capsizing it. Water sloshed over the side, soaking Emma and her equipment. The vocalizations through the speakers had risen to a fevered pitch, a cacophony of clicks, whistles, and calls that seemed to reverberate through the very air. Emma's mind raced. This behavior was unprecedented. Orcas were known for their curiosity, sometimes approaching boats closely, but this was something else entirely. This was aggression. As she struggled to maintain her balance on the pitching deck, Emma's scientific mind battled with her instinct for survival. Part of her wanted to continue recording, to document this extraordinary event. But the rational part of her knew she was in serious danger. "Mark!" she shouted into the radio, no longer attempting to hide the panic in her voice. "I need help. They're attacking the boat." The radio crackled with Mark's frantic response. But Emma couldn't make out the words over the sound of water rushing into the boat through a crack in the hull. An orca had rammed them with enough force to breach the fiberglass. As water began to pool around her feet, Emma made a desperate lunge for the emergency life vest stored in a compartment near the stern. Her fingers had just closed around the bright orange material when another violent impact sent her sprawling across the deck. Emma hit her head on the railing, her vision blurring. Through the haze of pain and fear, she saw a massive orca breach. Next to the boat, its body glistening in the morning sun. For a split second, their eyes met. Ancient, intelligent eyes regarding her with an intensity that chilled Emma to her core. Then the orca crashed back into the water, sending a massive wave over the orca song. Emma felt the boat tip, slowly, at first then with increasing speed. As the world turned upside down, her last coherent thought was a bizarre mix of terror and scientific curiosity. What had prompted this attack? What were these magnificent, terrifying creatures trying to communicate? Then she was underwater, the cold shocking her system, the muffled roar of rushing water filling her ears. The peaceful morning had transformed into a nightmare, and as Emma fought to orient herself in the churning waters, she realized with stark clarity that her life's work might very well become the death of her. The world spun as Emma struggled to right herself in the frigid waters of Johnstone Strait. Her ears rang from the sudden submersion, and her lungs burned with the need for air. With desperate strokes, she clawed her way to the surface, gasping as her head broke through the choppy waves. "Mark!" she screamed, her voice hoarse and barely audible over the rushing water. "Mark, do you copy?" Only static answered her cries. The radio, still clutched in her white-knuckled grip, gurgled pathetically before falling silent. Emma's eyes darted frantically across the water's surface, searching for any sign of her capsized boat or, more pressingly, the orcas that had attacked it. A flash of black and white cut through the water mere feet from her, and Emma's heart leapt into her throat. The sleek form of an adult orca glided past, its eyes seeming to lock onto her for a terrifying moment before disappearing beneath the waves. Emma treaded water, her breath coming in short, panicked gasps. Her mind raced, trying to make sense of what was happening. Orcas were intelligent, social creatures. They weren't known to attack humans unprovoked. So why now? Why her? A series of sharp clicks and whistles pierced the air, seeming to come from all directions at once. Emma's scientific training kicked in, recognizing the sounds as echolocation. The orcas were coordinating, communicating with each other. But about what? Stay calm, Emma muttered to herself, trying to slow her racing heart. Think, what would cause this behavior? Her thoughts were interrupted by a sudden surge of water as another orca surfaced nearby, its massive dorsal fin cutting through the waves like a knife. Emma instinctively recoiled, her legs kicking furiously to put distance between herself and the creature. But for every foot she managed to swim, the orca easily kept pace. It was toying with her, she realized, with a sickening lurch in her stomach, like a cat playing with a mouse before the kill. "Hey!" A distant shout caught Emma's attention. Squinting against the glare of the sun on the water, she saw a boat in the distance. Mark and the rest of her team were racing towards her, the small craft bouncing violently over the waves. Hope surged through Emma's chest, giving her a renewed burst of energy. She raised an arm, waving frantically. "Here! I'm over here!" Her jubilation was short-lived. As if sensing the approaching rescue, the orca's behavior suddenly shifted. The water around Emma erupted as multiple massive bodies surfaced, their black and white forms creating a living barrier between her and the approaching boat. "No, no, no," Emma whispered, her voice trembling. She could see Mark at the bow of the rescue boat, his face a mask of horror as he realized the situation. One of the orcas, Emma recognized it as Luna, the pod's matriarch, turned its massive head towards her. For a moment, time seemed to stand still. Emma found herself captivated by the orca's eye, an intelligence burning within it that seemed almost human. Then Luna opened her mouth, revealing rows of sharp teeth, and lunged. Emma barely had time to take a breath before she was pulled under. The world became a swirling chaos of bubbles and muffled sound. She felt the pressure of Luna's mouth around her leg, not biting down with full force, but holding her firmly. Panic threatened to overwhelm her, but Emma forced herself to remain as still as possible. Her oxygen-starved brain scrambled for any information that might help her survive. Orcas were hunters, yes, but they were also curious. Was this some sort of bizarre investigation? Just when her lungs felt like they would burst, Emma felt herself being propelled upwards. She broke the surface with a desperate gasp, coughing and sputtering as she gulped in precious air. "Emma!" Mark's voice carried across the water. "Hold on. We're coming." Emma tried to respond, but another orca surfaced beside her, its massive body creating a wave that pushed her back under. This time she was ready, taking a deep breath before the water closed over her head. Underwater, the clicks and whistles of the orca's communication were amplified. Emma found herself wishing desperately for her hydrophone, her scientific curiosity warring with her survival instinct. What were they saying? What did they want? As she was allowed to surface again, Emma caught sight of the rescue boat. It was closer now, but the orcas were still blocking its path. She could see Mark and another team member, Sarah, leaning over the side with a life ring ready to throw it. "Emma," Sarah shouted, "we're going to throw you the ring. Try to swim towards it." Emma nodded, gathering what strength she had left. As the life ring splashed into the water a few yards away, she began to swim, her strokes clumsy and weak from exhaustion and cold. But the orcas weren't done with her yet. As her fingers brushed the rough surface of the life ring, Emma felt a sudden tug on her leg. Luna had grabbed her again, this time with more force. "No!" Emma screamed, her fingers scrabbling for purchase on the slippery life ring. "Please, no!" For a moment she was suspended between two worlds, the air above where safety and her team waited, and the dark depths below where these intelligent but unpredictable predators seemed determined to drag her. Then with a powerful jerk, Luna pulled Emma under once more. This time the descent was faster, deeper. The pressure built in Emma's ears as she was dragged down, down, into the cold, dark heart of the strait. Emma's survival instinct kicked. into overdrive. She twisted and turned, trying to break free from Luna's grip. But the orca's hold was firm, not painful but unyielding. Emma's lungs screamed for air, black spots dancing at the edges of her vision. Just when she thought her body would betray her, when the urge to inhale water instead of the non-existent air became almost overwhelming, Luna released her. Emma floated in the water, disoriented and on the verge of unconsciousness. Through the murk, she could make out the shapes of the orcas circling her. Their movements were almost ceremonial, as if this was some sort of ritual and she was at the center of it. With the last of her strength, Emma kicked towards what she hoped was the surface. Her head broke through the waves, and she sucked, in a desperate breath, coughing and gagging. "There," she heard Sarah's voice sounding much closer now. "I see her." The rescue boat had managed to navigate through the pod of orcas which had spread out, no longer forming a barrier. As Emma blinked water from her eyes, she saw Mark leaning far over the side of the boat, his arm outstretched. "Emma, grab my hand." With a final Herculean effort, Emma reached out. Their fingers touched, slipped, then clasped firmly. With a grunt of exertion, Mark hauled her over the side of the boat, collapsing onto the deck with Emma in his arms. "Get us out of here," Sarah yelled to their pilot, who didn't need to be told twice. The boat's engine roared to life and they sped away from the scene of the attack. Emma lay on the deck, shivering violently, her mind struggling to process what had just happened. She could feel hands on her checking for injuries, wrapping her in emergency blankets, but her eyes remained fixed on the water behind them. The pod of orcas had surfaced again, their dorsal fins cutting through the waves as they watched the boat retreat. At the forefront was Luna, her distinctive markings visible even at this distance. As Emma watched, Luna raised her head out of the water, her eyes seeming to meet Emma's gaze one last time. Then with a powerful flick of her tail, the matriarch dove beneath the waves. One by one, the rest of the pod followed, disappearing into the depths of Johnstone Strait as suddenly as they had appeared. "Emma?" Mark's voice was gentle, concerned. "Emma, can you hear me? Are you okay?" Emma turned to look at him, her eyes wide and filled with a mix of fear, awe, and burning curiosity. When she spoke, her voice was barely a whisper, hoarse from seawater and screaming. They let me go. Why? Why did they attack and then—" "Let me go." Mark shook his head, his face pale with residual fear. "I don't know, Emma. I've never seen anything like it, but you're safe now. We're taking you to the hospital." As the boat sped towards shore, Emma's scientific mind began to race, despite her exhaustion and shock. The attack, the strange underwater ritual, the final release, none of it fit with known orca behavior. Something unprecedented had occurred today, something that challenged everything she thought she knew about these magnificent creatures. Emma closed her eyes, the gentle rocking of the boat, and the warmth of the emergency blankets lulling her towards unconsciousness. Her last coherent thought before darkness claimed her was a determination that bordered on obsession. She would unravel this mystery. She would understand what had happened today, what the orcas had been trying to communicate. No matter the cost, no matter how long it took, she would find answers. As Emma slipped into unconsciousness, the waters of Johnstone Strait continued to churn, hiding whatever secrets lay beneath its surface waiting to be discovered. The rhythmic beeping of medical equipment filled the stark hospital room as Emma Harrison slowly regained consciousness. Her eyelids fluttered open, squinting against the harsh fluorescent lights. As awareness crept back, so did the memories, the churning water, the sleek black bodies, those intelligent eyes boring into her soul. "Dr. Harrison, can you hear me?" A gentle voice cut through the fog of her mind. Emma turned her head slightly, wincing at the stiffness in her neck. A nurse stood beside her bed, adjusting an IV drip. "Yes," Emma croaked, her throat raw from swallowing seawater. "Where am I?" "You're at Campbell River Hospital," the nurse explained softly. "You've been here for 2 days. Do you remember what happened?" The events of that terrifying morning came rushing back with startling clarity. Emma's heart rate spiked, causing the monitor beside her to beep urgently. "The orcas!" she gasped, attempting to sit up. A sharp pain in her leg forced her back down with a groan. The nurse placed a calming hand on her shoulder. Easy now, Dr. Harrison. You're safe. But you've been through quite an ordeal. You have. Some lacerations on your leg where the orca grabbed you, and you're suffering from mild hypothermia and exhaustion. Emma nodded, her scientific mind already racing despite her physical discomfort. I need to speak with my team. Is Mark here? Or Sarah? As if on cue, there was a soft knock at the door. Mark's worried face appeared, relief washing over his features as he saw Emma awake. Emma, thank God you're all right, he exclaimed, rushing to her bedside. We've been so worried. The nurse excused herself, leaving Emma and Mark alone. For a moment they sat in silence, the weight of recent events hanging heavily between them. Finally, Emma spoke, her voice gaining strength. Mark, what happened after I lost consciousness? Did you get any footage of the attack? Mark's expression tightened. Emma, you nearly died. Maybe we should focus on your recovery before— Please, Mark, Emma interrupted, her eyes intense. This is important. We may have witnessed something unprecedented in orca behavior. I need to know everything. Mark sighed, recognizing the familiar determination in his colleague's voice. He pulled out a tablet from his bag and began to swipe through files. We did get footage, he admitted, both from the drone and from cameras on the rescue boat, but Emma, it's disturbing. He turned the tablet towards her, and Emma watched with a mixture of fascination and terror as the attack played out from above. She saw her tiny form in the water, surrounded by the massive black and white bodies of the orcas. The coordinated way they moved, hurting her, diving with her. It was unlike anything she had ever observed. Have you shown this to anyone else? Emma asked, her mind already formulating research questions. Mark shook his head. Just our immediate team. We wanted to wait until you were conscious before deciding how to proceed. Emma nodded, her eyes never leaving the screen. Good. We need to analyze this thoroughly before releasing anything. The implications of this behavior could be enormous. As they continued to review the footage, a tall man in a crisp uniform appeared at the door, clearing his throat to announce his presence. Dr. Harrison, I'm Officer Jennings with the Department of Fisheries and Oceans. If you're feeling up to it, I'd like to ask you a few questions about the incident. Emma straightened up, ignoring the pain that shot through her body. Of course, officer, please come in. As Officer Jennings settled into a chair, Emma could see the mixture of concern and skepticism in his eyes. She had encountered it before, the look of someone who respected her work but found it hard to believe that these generally peaceful creatures could be capable of such aggression. Dr. Harrison, can you walk me through what happened that morning? In your own words, please. Emma recounted the events as clearly as she could remember them, from the initial excitement of the pod's approach to the terrifying moments underwater. As she spoke, she could see Officer Jennings's expression grow increasingly troubled. And you're certain this was an intentional attack? He asked, his pen poised over his notepad. Could it not have been a case of overly curious behavior that got out of hand? Emma shook her head firmly. No, Officer Jennings. I've studied orca behavior for years. This was deliberate, coordinated action. They were communicating with each other throughout the entire event. She turned to Mark. Play him the hydrophone recordings. Mark looked uncertain. Emma, are you sure? We haven't had a chance to analyze them fully yet. Play them, Emma insisted, as the haunting sounds of orca vocalizations filled the room. Emma closed her eyes, remembering the bone-chilling moment when she had first heard them underwater. The clicks, whistles, and pulsed calls were far more complex than typical orca communications. Officer Jennings listened intently, his brow furrowed. When the recording ended, he let out a long breath. I've never heard anything quite like that before. Neither have I, Emma admitted. And that's what concerns me. Something provoked this pod to behave in a way that goes against everything. We know about orca-human interactions. We need to understand why. Officer Jennings nodded slowly, jotting down some final notes. Dr. Harrison, I appreciate your expertise in this matter. However, I hope you understand that this incident raises serious safety concerns. We may need to implement restrictions on research activities in the area until we can ensure this won't happen again. Emma felt a surge of frustration. Officer, with all due respect, restricting research is exactly the wrong approach. We need more data, not less. This event could be an isolated incident, or it could be indicative of a larger shift in ORCA behavior. Either way, we won't know unless we continue our work. The tension in the room was palpable as Officer Jennings considered her words. Finally, he stood, tucking his notepad into his pocket. I'll take your statement into consideration, Dr. Harrison. For now, focus on your recovery. We'll be in touch regarding any decisions about future research activities in the area. As he left, Emma slumped back against her pillows, exhaustion washing over her. Mark looked at her with concern. Emma, maybe we should hold off on analyzing the data until you're stronger. You've been through a traumatic experience. It's okay to take some time to process it. But Emma was already shaking her head, her eyes blazing with determination. No, Mark. We can't afford to waste any time. Those orcas were trying to communicate something. I could feel it. We need to understand what it was before it's too late. Mark sighed, recognizing the familiar stubbornness in his colleague's voice. All right, but at least let me bring the work here. You're not leaving this hospital until the doctors clear you. Emma nodded reluctantly, already itching to get back to her lab. As Mark left to gather their research materials, she turned her gaze to the window. In the distance, she could see a sliver of the strait where the attack had occurred. Kadamo, memory of Luna's eye, filled with an almost human-like intelligence, flashed through her mind. Emma shivered, not entirely from the lingering effects of hypothermia. What were you trying to tell me, she thought, her hands unconsciously clenching the hospital sheets. And how far am I willing to go to find out? As the sun began to set, over the waters of British Columbia, casting a golden glow across the hospital room, Emma Harrison made a silent vow. She would unravel this mystery, no matter the personal cost. The orcas had chosen her for a reason, and she was determined to understand why. Little did she know, her obsession with decoding the orca's message would lead her down a path that would challenge not only her scientific beliefs but also her understanding of the delicate balance between humans and the natural world. The attack was only the beginning of a journey that would change her life, and potentially the lives of everyone on the coast, forever. The salt-laden breeze whipped Emma's hair as she stood on the deck of the research vessel, her eyes scanning the choppy waters of Johnstone Strait. It had been 3 months since the attack, and despite the protests of her colleagues and family, she was back on the water. The scars on her leg had healed, but the memory of that day remained etched in her mind, driving her forward with an almost manic intensity. Any sign of them? Mark called from the cabin, his voice tight with tension. Emma shook her head, not taking her eyes off the horizon. Nothing yet, but they'll come. They always do. Since her release from the hospital, Emma had thrown herself into analyzing the data from the attack. The vocalizations they had recorded were unlike anything previously documented, more complex, more urgent. It was as if the orcas had been trying to convey a message, one that Emma was determined to decipher. Her obsession had not gone unnoticed. The university had expressed concerns about her returning to fieldwork so soon, and even Mark had suggested taking more time to recover. But Emma couldn't shake the feeling that time was running out, that whatever the orcas had been trying to communicate was of vital importance. A sudden splash caught her attention, and Emma's heart leapt into her throat. A sleek black dorsal fin cut through the water about 100 yards from the boat. "Mark, get out here!" she shouted, already rushing to lower the hydrophone into the water. Mark emerged from the cabin, his face a mixture of excitement and apprehension. Is it them? The same pod? Emma nodded, her fingers flying over the keyboard as she initialized the recording equipment. It's Luna. I'd recognize that dorsal fin anywhere. As more orcas surfaced around the boat, Emma felt a chill run down her spine. The memory of being dragged underwater flashed through her mind, and she had to take a deep breath to steady herself. "Emma," Mark said softly, placing a hand on her shoulder. "We can turn back if this is too much." She shook her head firmly. "No, we need this data. I need to understand." The orcas began to circle the boat, their movements eerily reminiscent of the day of the attack. But this time, instead of aggression, there was a sense of anticipation, as if they had been waiting for Emma to return. Suddenly, the hydrophone erupted with a cacophony of clicks, whistles, and pulsed calls. Emma's eyes widened as she watched the sound waves dance across her computer screen. It's the same vocalizations, she breathed. Mark, do you see this? The pattern is almost identical to what we recorded during the attack. Mark leaned in, his brow furrowed. But what does it mean? It's too complex to be typical hunting or social calls. Emma was about to respond when a massive orca breached just yards from the boat, sending a spray of water over the deck. She stumbled back, her heart pounding, as the orca's eye seemed to lock onto hers for a moment before it crashed back into the sea. Did you see that? Emma gasped, gripping the railing. It was Luna. She looked right at me. Mark nodded, his face pale. Emma, maybe we should... His words were cut off as the boat suddenly lurched violently to one side. Emma lost her footing, sliding across the wet deck towards the edge. Emma! Mark shouted, lunging for her. But before he could reach her, Emma felt herself tipping over the railing. For a heart-stopping moment, she was in free fall, the cold water of the strait rushing up to meet her. The shock of impact drove the air from her lungs. Emma thrashed in the water, disoriented and panicked. As she broke the surface, gasping for air, she found herself surrounded by the massive bodies of the orcas. Emma! Mark's voice seemed distant, muffled by the splash of waves and the pounding of blood in her ears. Hold on, I'm calling for help. But Emma barely registered his words. Her attention was fixed on Luna, who had surfaced just feet away. The orca's eye, intelligent and somehow familiar, seemed to bore into her very soul. And then something extraordinary happened. Luna opened her mouth, and instead of the terrifying display of teeth Emma expected, she heard a voice. Emma Harrison. The words seemed to reverberate through the water, more felt than heard. We have been waiting for you. Emma blinked, certain she must be hallucinating. Orcas couldn't speak. It was impossible. And yet, what are you? She managed to stammer, treading water. Luna's massive form glided closer. We are the guardians of these waters. We have watched your kind for millennia, but never before have we needed to make direct contact. Until now. Emma's scientific mind reeled, struggling to process what was happening. This defied every law of nature she knew, and yet she couldn't deny the evidence of her own senses. The attack, she said, her voice shaking. You were trying to communicate? A sense of affirmation washed over her, though. Luna hadn't visibly responded. We had to ensure you would listen. Your species stands on the brink of a catastrophe, one that will affect all life in these waters. Before Emma could ask for clarification, she felt a gentle pressure against her leg. Another orca had positioned itself beneath her, supporting her in the water. Come, Luna's voice resonated. There is much you need to see. A part of Emma's mind screamed that this was madness, that she should call out to Mark, swim back to the boat. But a deeper instinct, one she couldn't explain, told her this was why she had been drawn back to these waters. This was the answer she had been seeking. Okay, she whispered, hardly believing her own actions. Show me. As if on cue, the orca beneath her began to dive. Emma took a deep breath, casting one last glance at the research vessel where Mark was frantically trying to launch a rescue boat. Then she was underwater, carried deeper into the strait by her cetacean guides. The world became a blur of bubbles and sleek black forms. Emma's lungs began to burn, but just as she thought she couldn't hold her breath any longer, something changed. The water around her seemed to shimmer, and suddenly, breathing became possible. Do not be afraid. Luna's voice echoed in her mind. We have created a space where you can exist in our world for a time. Emma gasped, drawing in what felt like air but couldn't possibly be. Around her, the murky waters of the strait had given way to a vast, underwater expanse that seemed to glow with an inner light. What is this place? She asked, her voice sounding strange in the liquid environment. This is the heart of our domain, Luna explained, her massive form gliding gracefully beside Emma. From here, we monitor the health of these waters, and all who dwell within them. And it is here that we have detected a grave threat. As they swam deeper, Emma began to see shapes in the distance. At first, she thought they were simply rock formations or stands of kelp. But as they drew closer, her eyes widened in horror. Stretched out before her was a vast underwater graveyard. The remains of whales, seals, fish, and countless other marine creatures lay scattered across the seafloor. But it wasn't their presence that was shocking. Death was a natural part of the ocean ecosystem. It was the unnatural way their bodies were twisted, the strange growths that covered their skin, the obvious signs of suffering in their final moments. "What happened to them?" Emma whispered, her voice choked with emotion. Luna's voice was heavy with sorrow. "A sickness spreads through these waters. One born of your kind's carelessness and greed. The chemicals you pour into the sea, the warming of the waters, they have created something new, something that threatens all life here." As the full implications of what she was seeing hit her, Emma felt a wave of guilt and despair wash over her. I had no idea. We've been monitoring toxin levels, tracking temperature changes, but your science sees only fragments," Luna said, not unkindly. "We showed you this so you could understand the whole. The attack was a desperate attempt to make your kind listen before it's too late." Emma's mind raced, already formulating research proposals, thinking of who she needed to contact. "I have to tell people about this. We need to act now before—" Her words were cut off as a tremor passed through the water. The ethereal glow of their surroundings flickered, and Emma felt a surge of panic as she realized she could no longer breathe. "Our time grows short," Luna's voice echoed, tinged with urgency. "The barrier between our worlds weakens. You must return to your people, Emma Harrison. Tell them what you have seen. Make them listen before the sickness claims us all." Emma felt herself being propelled upwards, the strange underwater realm fading around her. As the surface rushed towards her, Luna's final words echoed in her mind. "Remember, you are the bridge between our worlds now. The fate of these waters rests in your hands." With a gasp, Emma broke the surface, finding herself once again in the choppy waters of Johnstone Strait. The research vessel was just yards away, Mark's panicked face visible as he prepared to dive in after her. As she was pulled from the water, shivering and stunned, Emma knew her life would never be the same. She had been given a mission, one that would challenge everything she thought she knew about science, nature, and the delicate balance between human progress and the health of the planet. The orcas had chosen her. Now it was up to Emma to make the world listen before it was too late. The fluorescent lights of the university conference room buzzed overhead as Emma stood before a panel of her peers, her hands trembling slightly as she gripped the edges of the podium. The faces before her ranged from skeptical to concerned, with a few showing outright disbelief. "Dr. Harrison," Dean Williamson began, his voice laden with a mixture of respect and apprehension, "we've reviewed your latest research proposal and frankly, we have some concerns." Emma took a deep breath, steeling herself for the battle ahead. She had known this wouldn't be easy, but she hadn't expected the level of resistance she was encountering. "I understand your concerns, Dean," she began, her voice steady despite her nerves. "But I assure you the data I've collected is sound. The orca pod in Johnstone Strait is exhibiting behavior that goes beyond anything we've previously documented." Dr. Renee Chen, head of the Marine Biology Department, leaned forward, her brow furrowed. "Emma, we don't doubt your expertise, but some of your claims are, well, they're extraordinary. Coordinated attacks on humans, orcas attempting direct communication. It flies in the face of everything we know about cetacean behavior." Emma nodded, acknowledging the point. "I know how it sounds, Renee. If I hadn't experienced it myself, I wouldn't believe it either. But that's why this research is so crucial. Something is changing in our oceans, something that's driving these intelligent creatures to desperate measures." She clicked a button on her remote, bringing up images on the screen behind her. Photographs of diseased marine life, charts showing alarming spikes in toxin levels, and spectrograms of the complex orca vocalizations filled the display. "This isn't just about unusual orca behavior," Emma continued, her voice gaining strength. "It's about a larger ecological crisis that we're only just beginning to understand. The orcas are the canary in the coal mine, warning us of a disaster that could affect all marine life in the region and potentially beyond." Dr. Marcus Harding, an older professor known for his conservative approach, scoffed audibly. "Dr. Harrison, while your dedication is admirable, your methods are questionable at best. You're anthropomorphizing these animals, attributing human-like intentions to what could simply be anomalous aggressive behavior. Emma felt a flash of frustration, but she pushed it down. She had anticipated this reaction. With all due respect, Dr. Harding, I'm not anthropomorphizing. I'm presenting evidence of complex communication and coordinated behavior that suggests a level of intelligence we haven't previously attributed to orcas. And more importantly, I'm showing you clear signs of an ecological crisis that demands our immediate attention. The room fell silent for a moment as the panel digested her words. Emma could see the conflict on their faces, the desire to trust a respected colleague warring with the sheer improbability of her claims. Finally, Dean Williamson spoke again. Dr. Harrison, no one doubts your commitment or your expertise, but you have to understand how this looks from our perspective. You suffered a traumatic experience and now you're making claims that, quite frankly, sound more like the plot of a science fiction novel than a serious research proposal. Emma felt a surge of anger at the implication, but before she could respond, the door to the conference room burst open. Mark Chen rushed in, out of breath and clutching a tablet. I'm sorry to interrupt, he gasped, but you all need to see this. He handed the tablet to Dean Williamson, who began to watch with a frown that quickly turned to an expression of shock. He passed the tablet around the table, each committee member's face growing more grave as they viewed its contents. What is this? Dr. Chen asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Mark looked to Emma, who nodded for him to explain. It's footage from a whale watching tour that just came in this morning. They encountered the same pod that Dr. Harrison has been studying. Emma stepped around the podium, her heart racing. What happened, Mark? He took a deep breath. The orcas surrounded the tour boat, but instead of the usual curious behavior we'd expect, well, you should see for yourself. The tablet made its way to Emma, and she pressed play on the video. The footage was shaky, clearly taken by a tourist, but what it showed was unmistakable. The orcas, led by Luna, had surrounded the boat, but instead of swimming playfully or breaching for the tourists' cameras, they were eerily still, their dorsal fins forming a circle around the vessel. Then, in perfect synchronization, each orca raised its head out of the water and emitted a long, mournful cry. The sound sent chills down Emma's spine. It was the same vocalization she had heard during her own encounter, the one that had seemed to carry words. The video ended with the orcas diving deep, leaving the tour boat floating in suddenly calm waters. The stunned silence of the tourists was broken only by someone whispering, "What the hell was that?" Emma looked up from the tablet to find every eye in the room on her. The skepticism had been replaced by a mix of fear and dawning realization. This, Emma said, her voice thick with emotion, is what I've been trying to tell you. These orcas are trying to communicate something to us, something urgent, and we need to figure out what it is before it's too late. Dean Williamson cleared, his throat, his earlier doubt replaced by grim determination. Dr. Harrison, I think we owe you an apology. Clearly there's more to this situation than we realized. What do you need from us to move forward with your research? Emma felt a surge of relief, quickly replaced by a sense of urgency. I need a full research team, unrestricted access to the strait, and cooperation from the Department of Fisheries and Oceans. We need to monitor these orcas around the clock, analyze every vocalization, every behavior, and most importantly, we need to investigate what's happening to the marine ecosystem in that area. Dr. Chen nodded, already pulling out her phone. I'll make some calls. We'll get you whatever resources you need. As the room erupted into action, with committee members making calls and discussing logistics, Emma felt a hand on her shoulder. She turned to find Mark, his eyes reflecting the same mix of excitement and fear that she felt. You did it, Emma, he said softly. They're finally listening. Emma nodded, but her expression remained grave. This is just the beginning, Mark. Whatever's happening out there in the strait, whatever the orcas are trying to tell us, I have a feeling we're running out of time to figure it out. As she gazed out the window at the distant waters of the Pacific, Emma couldn't shake the memory of Luna's words echoing in her mind. The fate of these waters rests in your hands. The weight of that responsibility settled on her shoulders, like a physical burden. She had convinced her peers, but that was only the first step. Now came the real challenge, deciphering the orca's message and uncovering the truth behind the ecological crisis threatening their world. As the sun began to set over the Vancouver skyline, casting a golden glow across the conference room, Emma made a silent vow. She would not rest until she had unraveled this mystery, no matter where it led her. The orcas had chosen her for a reason, and she was determined not to let them down. Little did she know, the journey ahead would test not only her scientific acumen but also her understanding of the delicate balance between humanity and nature. The orca's cry for help was just the beginning of a discovery that would shake the foundations of marine biology and forever change our relationship with the intelligent beings that share our planet. The research vessel Cetacean Song cut through the choppy waters of Johnstone Strait, its hull slicing through the early morning mist. On the deck, Dr. Emma Harrison stood motionless, her eyes fixed on the horizon. The past month had been a whirlwind of activity, assembling a team, securing funding, and setting up a state-of-the-art mobile research station on the coast. Now finally, they were back on the water, ready to unravel the mystery of the orca's behavior. "Dr. Harrison?" a voice called from behind her. "We're approaching the coordinates where the pod was last sighted." Emma turned to see Sarah Chen, a brilliant young marine biologist she'd handpicked for the team. "Thank you, Sarah. Let's start deploying the hydrophones. I want a full acoustic picture of this area." As the crew bustled around her, lowering equipment into the water and calibrating instruments, Emma felt a familiar mix of excitement and apprehension. Every fiber of her being told her they were on the cusp of something monumental, but the rational part of her mind still struggled with the implications of what she'd experienced. Mark joined her at the railing, his face etched with concern. "How are you holding up, Emma? You've barely slept since we left port." She offered him a wan smile. "I'm fine, Mark. Just anxious, I suppose. What if they don't show up? What if I can't?" Her words were cut short by a shout from the bow. "Orcas off the port side!" In an instant, the deck erupted into controlled chaos. Cameras whirred to life, sensors beeped as they began recording data, and the air filled with the excited murmurs of researchers. Emma rushed to the port side, her heart pounding. Through her binoculars, she could make out the distinctive dorsal, fins cutting through the water, and there at the head of the pod was Luna. "It's them," she breathed. The same pod. As if on cue, the orcas began to circle the boat, their movements eerily reminiscent of Emma's previous encounters. The team watched in awe as the massive creatures glided gracefully through the water, their black and white forms a stark contrast against the deep blue of the strait. Suddenly, the hydrophones crackled to life, filling the air with a complex series of clicks, whistles, and pulsed calls. Emma rushed to the monitoring station, her eyes scanning the spectrograms as they formed on the screen. "This is incredible," Sarah muttered, her fingers flying across the keyboard as she analyzed the data in real time. "The complexity of these vocalizations. It's unlike anything I've ever seen." Emma nodded, her own excitement building. "It's similar to what we recorded during the attack, but there's something different this time. Almost like a pattern," Mark finished, leaning in to study the screen. "Look at the way these frequencies repeat and interlock. It's almost like a language," Emma whispered, the implications sending a shiver down her spine. Before anyone could respond, a massive splash erupted next to the boat. The team stumbled, grabbing onto railings and equipment as water cascaded over the deck. As they regained their footing, a collective gasp went up. Luna had breached fully out of the water, her massive body suspended in the air for a heart-stopping moment before crashing back into the sea. But it wasn't the spectacular display of power that had everyone stunned. It was what they had seen in that brief moment. "Did you see that?" Sarah exclaimed, her voice shaking. "On her belly." "Those marks." Emma nodded, her mind racing. They weren't natural markings, they looked almost like symbols. Mark finished, his face pale. "Or writing." The implications hung heavy in the air. If these markings were intentional, if they truly were some form of communication, it would upend everything they thought they knew about cetacean intelligence. Emma took a deep breath, steeling herself. "We need clear photos of those markings, and I want every second of this encounter recorded. If they're trying to communicate, we need to catch every detail." As the team scrambled to adjust cameras and recalibrate sensors, Emma felt a strange sensation wash over her. It was as if the very air around her had changed, becoming charged with an energy she couldn't explain. Then she heard it. Not with her ears, but somehow within her mind. "Emma Harrison?" Luna's voice resonated, just as it had during their underwater encounter. "We have been waiting." Emma gripped the railing, her knuckles turning white. She glanced around, but no one else seemed to have heard the voice. Was she hallucinating? Had the stress and lack of sleep finally gotten to her? "What do you want?" she whispered, feeling slightly foolish for talking to thin air. "What are you trying to tell us?" As if in response, the orca's vocalizations increased in volume and complexity. The hydrophone speakers crackled with the intensity of the sound, causing several team members to wince and cover their ears. "Emma!" Mark called out, his voice barely audible over the cacophony. "The readings are off the charts. We've never recorded vocalizations at this frequency or intensity." Emma barely heard him. Her entire focus was on Luna, who had positioned herself directly beside the boat. Their eyes met, and in that moment, Emma felt a connection that defied scientific explanation. Suddenly, images began to flash through her mind. She saw vast underwater landscapes, teeming with life. She saw the complex social structures of the orcapods, felt their joy, their sorrow, their deep connection to the ocean around them. But then the images turned dark. She saw polluted waters, marine life struggling to survive in a changing environment. She felt the orcas' confusion and fear as their food sources dwindled and their habitats were destroyed. And then, most terrifyingly, she saw a creeping darkness, a sickness spreading through the waters, affecting everything it touched. Fish, seals, whales, all succumbing to a malady that twisted their bodies and clouded their minds. "Oh God," Emma gasped, stumbling back from the railing. "We're killing them. We're killing everything." Mark was at her side in an instant, supporting her as she swayed on her feet. Emma, what's wrong?" She looked at him, her eyes wild. "We need to get back to shore now. There's something in these waters, Mark. Something we've done, and if we don't stop it, it's going to destroy everything." As if sensing the urgency of the moment, the orcas began to disperse. Luna was the last to leave, fixing Emma with one final penetrating gaze before disappearing beneath the waves. The trip back to shore was a blur of frantic activity. Emma insisted on running preliminary tests on water samples they'd collected, her hands shaking as she peered into microscopes and analyzed readouts. As they approached the dock, Emma turned to her team, her face grave. "What we've seen today, what we've recorded, it changes everything. I know some of you might think I'm crazy, but I need you to trust me. The orcas are trying to warn us about something catastrophic happening in these waters, and we might be the only ones who can stop it." She paused, looking each team member in the eye. "This goes beyond our original research scope. What I'm asking, it could be dangerous. It will definitely be controversial. If any of you want to back out now, I'll understand." A moment of silence passed, broken by Sarah's determined voice. "We're with you, Dr. Harrison. Whatever's happening out there, we need to uncover the truth." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the team. Emma felt a surge of gratitude, tinged with the weight of responsibility. As they disembarked, Emma pulled Mark aside. "I need you to do something for me," she said in a low voice. "Those symbols we saw on Luna, I need you to research them. Check ancient petroglyphs, native art, anything that might give us a clue about their origin." Mark nodded, his expression serious. "What are you going to do?" Emma's gaze drifted back to the strait, where the mist was rolling in, shrouding the water in an ethereal haze. "I'm going to call in every favor I have. We need access to environmental data, pollution reports, anything that might explain what's happening to the marine ecosystem here." She turned back to Mark, her eyes blazing with determination. "And then I'm going back out there, alone if I have to. Whatever the orcas are trying to tell us, whatever this sickness is that's spreading through the waters, I need to understand it. We might be the only hope these creatures have." As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the dock, Emma felt the weight of her mission settle onto her shoulders. She had started this journey seeking to understand orca behavior, but now she found herself at the center of something far larger, far more consequential. The fate of an entire ecosystem hung in the balance, and the key to its salvation lay in deciphering the mysterious message of the orcas. As she watched her team unload their equipment, each of them driven by the same sense of urgency she felt, Emma made a silent vow. She would unravel this mystery no matter the cost. She would be the voice for those creatures who could not speak for themselves. And in doing so, she might just help humanity rediscover its connection to the natural world before it was too late. The cool evening breeze carried the scent of salt and seaweed, a reminder of the vast, mysterious world that lay just beyond the shore. As Emma turned to join her team, she could have sworn she heard Luna's voice one last time. Carried on the wind. Hurry, Emma Harrison, time grows short. With renewed determination, Emma strode towards the research facility. The real work was just beginning, and she had a feeling that the fate of more than just the orcas hung in the balance. Whatever secrets lay hidden in the depths of Johnstone Strait, she was determined to bring them to light. For the sake of the orcas, for the sake of the oceans, and for the sake of humanity itself. The harsh fluorescent lights of the laboratory cast long shadows as Emma hunched over her microscope, her eyes burning from hours of intense focus. It had been 2 weeks since their encounter with the orcas, and she had barely left the research facility since then. Empty coffee, cups and hastily scribbled notes littered her workstation, testament to her relentless pursuit of answers. Emma? Mark's voice broke through her concentration. It's past midnight. You should get some rest. She looked up, blinking as her eyes adjusted. Mark stood in the doorway, concern etched on his tired face. I can't, Mark, she said, gesturing to the slides before her. There's something here, I know it. Look at these water samples. Mark sighed but moved to join her. As he peered into the microscope, his brow furrowed. What am I looking at? It's a type of microorganism I've never seen before, Emma explained, her voice taut with excitement and fatigue. It's in all the samples we've taken from the areas where the orcas have been spotted, and look at how it's interacting with the other microfauna. Mark adjusted the focus, his frown deepening. It's consuming them? Emma nodded grimly. Not just consuming. It's altering them on a cellular level. I think this might be the sickness the orcas were trying to warn us about. Before Mark could respond, a commotion in the hallway drew their attention. Sarah burst into the lab, her tablet clutched tightly in her hands. Dr. Harrison, you need to see this, she said breathlessly. It's happening again. Emma was on her feet in an instant. What's happening, the orcas? Sarah nodded, pulling up a live video feed on her tablet. A pod was spotted near Telegraph Cove. They're exhibiting the same behavior we saw before. The footage showed a group of orcas circling a small fishing boat. Their movements were synchronized, almost ritualistic. As they watched, the orcas began to emit a series of vocalizations that caused the audio on the tablet to distort. We need to get out there, Emma said, already moving towards the door. Mark, call the captain. I want the cetacean song ready. To launch in 20 minutes. As they raced to the docks, Emma's mind whirled with possibilities. The microorganisms, the orcas' behavior, the strange symbols they had seen. How did it all fit together? The cetacean song cut through the dark waters, its powerful engines propelling them towards the reported orca sighting. Emma stood at the bow, her eyes straining to penetrate the pre-dawn gloom. As they approached Telegraph Cove, a haunting sound drifted across the water. Do you hear that? Sarah asked, her voice hushed. Emma nodded, a chill running down her spine. It was the same eerie vocalizations they had recorded before, but there was something different this time. Something more urgent. Suddenly the water around their boat erupted as a massive orca breached just yards away. Emma stumbled back, her heart pounding. As the creature crashed back into the sea, she caught a glimpse of familiar markings. Luna, she whispered. As if in response, Luna surfaced again, this time staying partially above water. Her intelligent eye fixed on Emma, and once again that strange connection formed. Emma Harrison, Luna's voice resonated in her mind. The time has come. You must see. Before Emma could respond, she felt a strong hand grip her arm. Emma, what are you doing? Mark's voice was filled with alarm. She realized she had been leaning dangerously far over the railing, as if drawn by an unseen force. I need to go with them, Mark. What? Emma, you can't be serious. It's not safe. But Emma's resolve was set. She turned to face her friend, her eyes blazing with determination. Mark, listen to me. This is what we've been working towards. The orcas are trying to show us something vital. I have to go. Mark shook his head, his face a mask of concern and frustration. Emma, this is insane. You're talking about jumping into freezing water with a pod of orcas that have already attacked you once. I know how it sounds, Emma said, her voice softening. But I also know that I'm right about this. Whatever is happening in these waters, the orcas are the key to understanding it. And for some reason, they've chosen me to communicate with. She placed a hand on Mark's shoulder, meeting his worried gaze. I need you to trust me, Mark, and I need you to be ready. Whatever I discover down there, we'll need to act fast. For a long moment, Mark said nothing. Then, with a resigned sigh, he nodded. All right, Emma, but we're doing this my way. He turned to the crew. Prepare the diving gear and get the emergency response team on standby. As Emma donned the wetsuit and checked her oxygen tanks, she felt a strange calm settle over her. This was it, the moment everything had been leading to. Be careful down there, Sarah said, helping her secure the final straps. And Emma? Find out what's killing our oceans. With a nod to her team, Emma stepped to the edge of the boat. Luna and the other orcas circled below, waiting. Taking a deep breath, Emma stepped off the edge and plunged into the cold, dark waters of the strait. The shock of the icy water momentarily disoriented her, but as her eyes adjusted, she found herself surrounded by the massive forms of the orcas. Luna glided closer, and Emma felt that strange connection strengthen. Follow. Luna's voice echoed in her mind. The orcas began to dive, and Emma followed, her heart pounding with a mix of fear and exhilaration. As they descended deeper into the strait, the water around them began to change. It became darker, thicker, as if filled with some kind of particulate matter. Emma checked her depth gauge and frowned. They were far deeper than she had anticipated, and her oxygen supply wouldn't last much longer at this depth. Just as she was about to signal that she needed to ascend, Luna's voice filled her mind again. Look, Emma Harrison. See what your kind has wrought. The murky water suddenly cleared, as if a veil had been lifted, and Emma had to stifle a gasp. That would have filled her mask with water. Stretched out before her was a vast underwater graveyard. The seafloor was littered with the remains of marine life, whales, seals, fish, and countless smaller organisms. But it wasn't just the scale of the death that horrified Emma. It was the state of the remains. The bodies were twisted, malformed, as if they had been altered at a fundamental level before they died. Luna guided her closer to one of the larger carcasses, a young humpback whale. As Emma examined it, she saw something that made her blood run cold. The whale's skin was covered in a strange, iridescent growth that pulsed with an inner light. Suddenly, Emma understood. The microorganisms she had observed in her lab weren't just consuming marine life, they were transforming it. This was the sickness the orcas had been trying to warn them about. As if reading her thoughts, Luna's voice resonated once more. The small bringers of death multiply. They change all they touch. Soon, nothing will remain untainted. Emma's mind raced. The microorganisms must be some kind of mutated bacteria or virus, possibly caused by pollution or climate change. But how had it spread so quickly? And more importantly, how could they stop it? She turned to Luna, trying to project her thoughts as clearly as possible. How do we stop this? How can we help? The massive orca regarded her with an eye that seemed to hold ancient wisdom. The answer lies in balance, Emma Harrison. Your kind has upset the harmony of the oceans. Only by restoring that balance can the small bringers of death be stopped. Before Emma could ask for clarification, she felt a tug on her arm. Her oxygen alarm was blaring. She needed to surface immediately. As she began to ascend, guided by the orcas, Emma's mind whirled with the implications of what she had seen. The fate of the entire marine ecosystem hung in the balance, and somehow she was at the center of it all, breaking the surface beside. The cetacean song, Emma was immediately pulled aboard by the waiting crew. As she gasped for air, pulling off her mask, she locked eyes with Mark. "Well?" he asked, his voice tense with anticipation. Emma took a deep breath, her eyes haunted by what she had witnessed. "It's worse than we thought, Mark. Much worse. We need to contact every marine research facility on the coast. Hell, contact NOAA and the EPA too." She stood on shaky legs, her determination overriding her exhaustion. What's happening here isn't just a local problem. If we don't find a way to stop it, it could mean the end of life in our oceans as we know it. As the first rays of dawn broke over the horizon, painting the sky in hues of pink and gold, Emma gazed out at the seemingly peaceful waters of the strait. Beneath that calm surface, a battle for survival was raging, and she was now its reluctant general. The orcas had shown her the truth. Now it was up to her and her team to find a way to save not just the orcas, but all marine life before it was too late. As the cetacean song turned back toward shore, Emma silently vowed to do whatever it took to restore the balance that had been lost. The fate of the oceans now rested in human hands, guided by the ancient wisdom of the orcas. The real work was just beginning, and Emma knew that the clock was ticking. The race to save the seas had begun. The sun had barely crested the horizon when Emma burst into the makeshift laboratory, her hair still damp from the ocean, and her eyes wild with urgency. The team, bleary-eyed from another long night of analysis, snapped to attention at her entrance. "We need to move fast," Emma declared, her voice hoarse but filled with determination. "What we saw down there, it's worse than we could have imagined." Mark, who had been poring over satellite imagery, looked up with concern. "Emma, what happened out there? You've been radio silent for hours." Emma took a deep breath, steadying herself against a nearby desk. The weight of what she had witnessed in the depths of Johnstone Strait pressed heavily upon her. "The orcas. They showed me something. A graveyard, Mark. An underwater graveyard stretching as far as I could see. Sarah, the team's marine biologist, stepped forward, her brow furrowed. "A graveyard? What do you mean?" Emma's hand shook slightly as she pulled out a small vial from her wetsuit pocket. Inside, a strange, iridescent substance swirled. "This," she said, holding up the vial, "is killing everything in the strait. And if we don't stop it, it could spread to the entire Pacific." The team gathered around as Emma recounted her underwater journey with Luna and the pod. She described the twisted remains of marine life, the pulsing growths that covered them, and the eerie, otherworldly quality of the contaminated water. "It's some kind of microorganism," Emma explained, placing the vial carefully into a containment unit. "But like nothing I've ever seen before, it's not just killing marine life, it's changing it." Dr. Hiroshi Tanaka, the team's microbiologist, immediately moved to prepare slides. "We need to analyze this immediately. If it's a new pathogen, we need to understand its structure, its method of reproduction, everything." As Hiroshi set to work, Emma turned to the rest of the team. "This isn't just a scientific problem anymore. We're facing an ecological disaster on a scale we've never seen. We need to alert the authorities, get more resources." Mark nodded, already reaching for his phone. "I'll contact the Department of Fisheries and Oceans. They need to know about this immediately." "Good," Emma said. "Sarah, I need you to compile all our data on the orca behavior. Their vocalizations, the symbols we saw, everything. There has to be a connection between their warnings and this infection." Sarah hesitated, a look of confusion crossing her face. "Dr. Harrison, are you sure about this? I mean, the idea that the orcas are actively trying to communicate with us about an ecological disaster." Emma fixed Sarah with an intense gaze. "I know how it sounds, but I'm telling you what I experienced down there. It wasn't just animal behavior. The orcas are aware, Sarah. They understand what's happening, and they're desperate for us to understand too." Before Sarah could respond, Hiroshi's voice cut through the tension. "Dr. Harrison, you need to see this." The team huddled around, the microscope as Hiroshi stepped back, his face pale. "I've never seen anything like it. The microorganism, it's not just one thing. It's like it's constantly evolving, changing its structure even as we watch." Emma leaned in to look and felt her heart sink. The iridescent substance was indeed shifting, its cellular structure morphing in real time. "This is why it's so deadly," she murmured. "It adapts to whatever it encounters. Our usual environmental defenses don't stand a chance." A heavy silence fell over the lab as the implications sank in. It was Mark who finally broke it, his voice grim but determined. "So what do we do? How do we fight something like this?" Emma straightened up, her mind racing. "We need to approach this from multiple angles. Hiroshi, keep working on understanding the pathogen. We need to know everything about its life cycle, its weaknesses." She turned to Sarah. "I want you to focus on the orcas. If they've been aware of this threat, they might have developed some kind of resistance. We need to understand their physiology, their behavior, everything." "What about me?" Mark asked. Emma met his gaze, seeing the same mix of fear and determination she felt. "You and I are going back out there. We need more samples from different areas of the strait. We need to understand how far this has spread." As the team dispersed to their tasks, Emma felt a moment of doubt creep in. They were facing an enemy they barely understood, with potential global consequences. The weight of responsibility was overwhelming. A gentle touch on her arm startled her out of her thoughts. It was Dr. Eleanor Chen, the team's senior marine ecologist, her eyes kind but serious. "Emma," she said softly, "I've been analyzing the water quality data from the past few months. There's something you should see." Eleanor led Emma to her workstation, pulling up a series of graphs on her monitor. "Look at these chemical concentrations. They've been steadily rising, but it's not just normal pollution. There's something else here, something I can't identify." Emma leaned in, her eyes scanning the data. "When did this start?" "That's the strange part," Eleanor replied. "The spike begins exactly 3 months ago, right around the time the orcas started behaving unusually." A chill ran down Emma's spine as pieces of the puzzle began to click into place. It's not a coincidence. Whatever this is, it didn't occur naturally. Someone or something introduced it into the ecosystem. Eleanor nodded grimly. "That's what I was afraid of." "Emma, if this is an artificial pathogen, then we're not just dealing with an ecological disaster," Emma finished. "We're looking at a potential crime against nature." The gravity of the situation settled over them like a heavy cloud. Emma's mind raced with the implications. If this was indeed an intentional act, who was behind it? And more importantly, why? A commotion at the lab entrance snapped them out of their grim contemplation. Mark burst in, his face flushed with excitement and fear. "Emma, we've got company," he panted. "There's a government task force landing at the marina. They say they're here about our research." Emma's heart raced. Had their alerts already reached the highest levels, or was something else going on? "All right," she said, straightening her shoulders. "Let's go meet them." "But Mark," she added in a low voice, "make sure all our data is backed up and secure. I have a feeling things are about to get complicated." As they made their way to the marina, Emma couldn't shake the feeling that they were standing on the precipice of something much larger than they had initially realized. The infected waters of Johnstone Strait had become ground zero for a mystery that threatened not just the local ecosystem, but potentially the entire world's oceans. And somehow, the orcas were at the center of it all, their haunting calls a desperate plea for help that only Emma seemed able to hear. As the sleek government helicopters touched down, kicking up spray from the water's surface, Emma steeled herself for the battle ahead. Whatever forces were at play here, whatever dark purpose lay behind the spreading sickness in the waters, she was determined to uncover the truth. For the sake of the orcas, for the health of the oceans, and for the future of the planet itself, she would not rest until she had answers. The fate of an entire ecosystem hung in the balance, and Emma Harrison found herself the unlikely champion in a war she never expected to fight. As she stepped forward to meet the approaching officials, Luna's haunting voice echoed in her mind one last time. "Hurry, Emma Harrison. The balance must be restored." With renewed determination, Emma squared her shoulders and prepared to face whatever challenges lay ahead. The battle for the future of the oceans had begun, and she was ready to fight. The wind whipped across the deck of the Cetacean Song as it cut through the choppy waters of Johnstone Strait. Emma stood at the bow, her eyes scanning the horizon, with a mixture of anticipation and dread. It had been 3 days since their last encounter with the orcas, 3 days of frantic research and mounting tension. Anything? Mark called from the wheelhouse. Emma shook her head, frustration etched on her face. Nothing yet. It's like they've vanished. The disappearance of the ORCA pod had coincided with an alarming increase in reports of marine life die-offs along the coast. Emma couldn't shake the feeling that time was running out. Suddenly, a crackle came over the radio. "Dr. Harrison?" It was Sarah's voice from the research base. "We've got something. You need to see this." "What is it?" Emma asked, her heart racing. It's easier if you see for yourself." "How fast can you get back to base?" Emma exchanged a look with Mark. "We're on our way," she replied, already moving to help prepare the boat for the return journey. As they approached the dock, Emma could see a flurry of activity at the research station. Sarah was waiting for them, her face pale and drawn. "What's going on?" Emma demanded as she leapt from the boat. Sarah wordlessly handed her a tablet. On the screen was a satellite image of the strait, but instead of the usual blue, large portions were tinted an eerie phosphorescent green. "When was this taken?" Emma asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "An hour ago," Sarah replied, "and it's spreading fast. Whatever this is, it's not just affecting individual animals anymore. It's changing the entire ecosystem." Emma's mind raced. The green areas on the map corresponded almost exactly with the locations where they'd encountered the orcas. "It's not a coincidence," she murmured. "The orcas were trying to show us where it was spreading." As they hurried into the lab, they found Dr. Tanaka hunched over a microscope, his brow furrowed in concentration. "Hiroshi," Emma called. "Please tell me you have something." The microbiologist looked up, his eyes red from lack of sleep. "It's unlike anything I've ever seen, Dr. Harrison. The pathogen, it's not just evolving, it's intelligently adapting." "What do you mean, intelligently?" Mark asked, voicing the question on everyone's mind. Hiroshi gestured to his computer screen, where a simulation was running. "Watch this. When we introduce any kind of counter-agent, the pathogen doesn't just resist it, it anticipates it, changing its structure before the threat even reaches it." Emma felt a chill run down her spine. That's not possible. Unless it was engineered. A new voice finished. They all turned to see a man in a crisp suit standing in the doorway, flanked by 2 stern-looking individuals. He flashed a badge. "Dr. Harrison, I'm Agent Reeves, National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. We need to talk." The atmosphere in the room instantly tensed. Emma straightened, her eyes narrowing. "Agent Reeves, I wasn't aware NOAA had a badge-carrying division." A thin smile crossed the agent's face. "There's a lot you're not aware of, Dr. Harrison, but right now, we need your help." Over the next hour, Agent Reeves laid out a story that seemed more like science fiction than reality. A secret government project to develop a rapidly evolving cleanup organism for oil spills. A test gone wrong. And now, a potential ecological disaster that threatened to spread beyond the strait and into the open ocean. "So you're saying your cleanup organism has gone rogue?" Emma asked, her voice tight with barely contained anger. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" "Agent," Reeves had the decency to look chagrined. "We underestimated its adaptive capabilities. By the time we realized what was happening, it had already spread beyond our control." Mark slammed his fist on the table. "And you kept it secret all this time, while we've been out there risking our lives trying to figure out what's going on?" "We had to contain the information," Agent Reeves replied. "If word got out about what we'd done..." "Enough," Emma cut in, her voice cold. "What matters now is stopping this thing. You said you need our help. Why?" Agent Reeves turned to her, his expression grave. "Because you're the only one who's communicated with the orcas, and we think they might be the key to stopping this." A heavy silence fell over the room as the implications sank in. Emma's mind whirled with possibilities and questions. The orcas, they've been resistant to the pathogen. They've been trying to warn us. She turned to her team. "Hiroshi, I need you to compare the orca genetic samples we have with the pathogen. Look for any anomalies, any signs of natural resistance. Sarah, compile all the data we have on the orca's behavior patterns since this started. Mark, you and I are going back out there. We need to make contact with the pod again. As the team sprang into action, Emma fixed Agent Reeves with a steely gaze. I'll help you, but on one condition. When this is over, everything comes to light. The public deserves to know what happened here. Agent Reeves hesitated for a moment before nodding. Agreed, but first we need to stop this thing before it's too late. As they prepared to head back out onto the water, Emma couldn't shake a feeling of foreboding. They were gambling everything on her ability to communicate with the orcas, to somehow bridge the gap between two species in a way that had never been done before. As the cetacean song pulled away from the dock, Emma stood at the bow, her eyes scanning the waters that had become both familiar and alien. Somewhere out there, Luna and her pod were waiting, and with them, perhaps, lay the key to saving not just the strait, but all the world's oceans. The boat cut through the eerily glowing green water, a stark reminder of the invisible battle being waged beneath the surface. Emma felt the weight of responsibility pressing down on her. The fate of an entire ecosystem, perhaps even more, rested on what happened in the next few hours. As they neared the last known location of the orca pod, Emma closed her eyes, reaching out with her mind in a way she still didn't fully understand. Luna, she whispered into the wind. We need you, please. For a long moment there was nothing but the sound of waves lapping against the hull. Then, a haunting call echoed across the water. Emma's eyes snapped open to see a massive dorsal fin breaking the surface nearby. There, she shouted, pointing. As the boat slowed, more fins appeared. The pod had answered her call. Emma's heart raced as she prepared to dive into the glowing waters. Whatever happened next would determine the fate of not just the orcas, but of all marine life in these waters and beyond. As she stepped to the edge of the boat, wetsuit on and dive gear ready, Mark caught her arm. Emma, he said, his voice thick with emotion. Be careful down there, we need you to come back. She nodded, offering a small smile. I will. And Mark? Whatever happens, thank you. For everything. With that, she stepped off the edge and into the unknown, ready to face whatever challenges lay beneath the surface. As the glowing water closed over her head, Emma steeled herself for what was to come. The final confrontation with the microscopic invader was about to begin, with the orcas as her allies and the fate of the oceans hanging in the balance. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the beach as Emma sat on a weathered piece of driftwood, her eyes fixed on the horizon, where the waters of Johnstone Strait melted into the sky. 6 months had passed since that fateful dive, since the day they had finally unraveled the mystery of the orca's warning and found a way to neutralize the engineered pathogen that had threatened to destroy the marine ecosystem. The beach was alive with activity. A group of researchers from various universities and environmental agencies bustled about, setting up equipment for ongoing monitoring of the strait's recovery. It was a far cry from the tense, secretive atmosphere that had pervaded their work in those critical early days. Dr. Harrison? A voice called, pulling Emma from her reverie. She turned to see a young graduate student approaching, clipboard in hand. The latest water sample results are in. Would you like to take a look? Emma nodded, accepting the clipboard. As she scanned the data, a small smile tugged at the corners of her mouth. The levels of the mutant microorganism had dropped to nearly undetectable levels. The strait was healing. Thank you, Jenna, she said, handing back the clipboard. This is excellent progress. Make sure to update the recovery model with these new figures. As Jenna hurried off, Emma's gaze was drawn back to the water. Somewhere out there, Luna and her pod were swimming free, no longer burdened by the desperate need to warn humanity of the impending disaster. The sound of footsteps on sand announced Mark's approach. He sat down beside her, following her gaze out to sea. Penny, for your thoughts? He asked, bumping her shoulder gently with his own. Emma sighed, a complex mix of emotions playing across her face. I was just thinking about everything that's happened, how close we came to losing it all, and how much has changed since then. Mark nodded, understanding in his eyes. It's been quite a journey. But look at what we've accomplished, Emma. The strait is recovering. The orcas are thriving. And humanity. Well, we've taken a big step towards understanding our place in the ecosystem. It was true. The revelation of the government's ill-fated experiment, and the subsequent race to save the strait had sparked a global conversation about marine conservation and the interconnectedness of all life on Earth. Emma's ability to communicate with the orcas had challenged long-held beliefs about animal intelligence and consciousness. "I keep thinking about that last encounter with Luna," Emma said softly. "When we finally understood what needed to be done." The memory washed over her, as vivid as if it had happened yesterday. She had been deep beneath the surface, surrounded by the eerie glow of the bioluminescent pathogen when Luna had approached. In that moment, their minds had connected more clearly than ever before. Through Luna's eyes, Emma had seen the long history of the orcas, their deep connection to the waters they called home. She had felt their pain as they watched the oceans they loved slowly dying, poisoned by human carelessness. And she had understood, finally, what needed to be done. The solution hadn't been a technological marvel or a chemical countermeasure. It had been about restoring balance. The orcas, through generations of adaptation, had developed a natural defense against the pathogen. By synthesizing this defense and introducing it into the ecosystem in a carefully controlled manner, they had given nature the tools it needed to heal itself. "We couldn't have done it without them," Emma mused. "Without Luna." Mark squeezed her shoulder gently. "And they couldn't have done it without you, Emma. You were the bridge they needed." A comfortable silence fell between them, broken only by the gentle lapping of waves on the shore and the distant calls of seabirds. "Dr. Harrison! Dr. Chen!" Jenna's excited voice cut through the tranquility. She was running towards them, waving her tablet. "You need to see this." Emma and Mark stood, brushing sand from their clothes as Jenna reached them, slightly out of breath. "What is it?" Emma asked, her curiosity piqued by the young researcher's excitement. Jenna thrust the tablet towards them. On the screen was a live feed from one of their underwater cameras. As they watched, a group of orcas swam into view. But it wasn't just any group. "It's Luna's pod," Mark breathed. Emma's heart skipped a beat as she recognized the distinctive markings of the orca that had changed her life. But there was something else. Something that made her gasp in wonder. Swimming alongside Luna was a tiny calf, its black and white coloration still tinged with the orange hue of a newborn. "A baby," Emma whispered, her eyes filling with tears. "Luna has a calf." The significance of the moment wasn't lost on any of them. This new life was a testament to the resilience of nature, a symbol of hope for the future of the strait and all who called it home. As they watched the pod swim gracefully through the recovering waters, Emma felt a familiar presence in her mind. It wasn't as clear as it had been during those intense days of crisis, but it was unmistakably Luna. The sensation was one of gratitude, of joy, and of a deep, abiding connection between species. In that moment, Emma understood that while the immediate danger had passed, her journey, their journey, was far from over. "We should get a boat out there," Mark said, already reaching for his phone to call the team. "We need to document this, to track the calf's development." Emma placed a hand on his arm, stopping him. "Not yet," she said softly. "Let's give them this moment. They've earned it." As the sun began to dip below the horizon, painting the sky in brilliant hues of orange and pink, Emma, Mark, and Jenna stood on the beach watching the orcas in reverent silence. The new calf breached playfully, its tiny form silhouetted against the setting sun. In that perfect moment, Emma felt a profound sense of purpose settle over her. The crisis that had brought her into communication with the orcas had been averted, but the work of understanding these magnificent creatures, of protecting their home, and forging a new relationship between humans and the ocean, was only beginning. As darkness fell and the orcas disappeared into the depths, Emma turned to her colleagues, a determined glint in her eye. "All right," she said, her voice filled with quiet resolve. "Let's get back to work. We've got a lot to do." Mark nodded, a smile playing on his lips. "Where do we start?" Emma gazed out at the strait one last time, feeling the weight of Luna's trust, the responsibility of the knowledge she had gained, and the hope represented by that tiny new calf. "We start by listening," she said, "to the orcas, to the ocean, to every living thing that calls these waters home. We've been given a second chance, a chance to get it right, and this time we're not going to waste it." As they walked back towards the research station, the first stars beginning to twinkle overhead, Emma felt a sense of anticipation for the challenges and discoveries that lay ahead. The orcas had shown them the way. Now it was up to humanity to follow that path, to forge a new relationship with the natural world based on understanding, respect, and harmony. The story of the orcas of Johnstone Strait was far from over. In many ways, Emma realized it was only just beginning.